Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 32 of B-Road Ballers, the review series for Gran Turismo's selection of hot hatches, older and newer, of a variety of sizes and variety of powers and weights. And one of the advantages of having that kind of variety is you have vehicles which can be drastically different in the way they approach their performance, but both brilliant in their own way. And this is one of those cars. It's a car which is kind of a cult classic, but surprisingly undervalued from what I've seen on Gran Turismo. There are certainly people who use the car, and the people who do use it tend to really like it. But nowhere near as many people appreciate the car as I would have personally expected to. And the car in question is a relatively classic hot hatch from the early 80s called the Honda City Turbo 2, and it's an interesting hot hatch. It's relatively unique because it's larger in capacity and larger in physical size than a K car, but at the same time a lot smaller in physical size, length, height, width, etc., and smaller in engine capacity than a traditional hot hatch. Not necessarily just newer ones, but some of the older ones as well. So it almost falls into its own little niche within the hot hatch category, and that's pretty cool and potentially a good selling point depending on how good it actually is. Now, as far as spec, it's only got a 1.2 litre engine. That doesn't sound like much. That's bigger than a K car, but still not much. But the power and torque, especially the power though, that it can get from that engine is remarkably good. With the turbo, 262 horsepower is the output of the City Turbo 2, which is seriously impressive for a 1.2 litre, especially a 1.2 litre of its age. It also puts out 218 foot-pounds of torque, which is also very high. Not as impressive as the power, but still impressive. The PP is very surprisingly high, I would say, for this model. Not necessarily surprising when you see its spec, but surprising if you look at the car and were to guess what its PP would probably be. If you haven't bought the car before, you'd probably assume the PP would be around maybe 460, 470, something like that. It's 523. That's a seriously high PP for any hot hatch, let alone a 1.2 litre from the 80s. So why is it so high, and can it live up to that? Well, one of the reasons why it's so high is because that huge amount of power for its engine is combined with a weight which is also deceiving. This car is a lot lighter than you'd expect. In fact, it's actually lighter than some K cars, which is impressive given that the engine is double the size of a K car. It weighs in at just 653 kilos, which is insanely lightweight given the look of the car. It doesn't look heavy as such, but you'd probably assume it would weigh somewhere between 780 and say 830 kilos, most probably. It weighs over 100 kilos less than what I would have personally surmised it would probably weigh based on its look. Because although it is a small car, it looks quite chunky. It's relatively wide in comparison to its height and length, giving it an almost cube-like shape. And it doesn't look particularly lightweight, it has to be said, especially not if you put it next to a K car and were to guess which one was lighter. 9 times out of 10, the City Turbo will be lighter than most of the K cars on Gran Turismo, and that's seriously impressive. Now combine that ultra lightweight with the power, and you're putting out some serious horsepower per tonne, just over 400 horsepower per tonne in fact, and that is pretty high. It's not necessarily up there with the best of them, but that's high, especially for its engine capacity and for its power. That's very, very impressive specs overall. But combine that, funnily enough in a similar way to yesterday's episode, which also featured a Honda, with its price. And that's when this car really starts to get into brilliant territory, because just like the Honda Coupe from yesterday, this car is ridiculously cheap in comparison to how good it is. it costs just over 12,000 credits. Now that is roughly the same kind of price as a K car on Gran Turismo. Some vary, but that's a similar price. There aren't many hot hatches for that kind of money. The vast majority of them cost over 20, 30, 40,000 credits. This is 12,000 credits for something which is lighter than most of the other hot hatches, in some cases even half of the weight or less, has at least a similar horsepower per tonne output, in some cases even more, and has enough power to not just take them on, but potentially to outrun them on certain tracks, and a PP range which goes so high it's almost insane for a car with such a tiny engine. Now, does it deliver on that? Because so far it seems to be an amazing deal, and automatically asks the question, why don't people use it more, if it's any good? Well, it certainly is good. The front-wheel drive chassis is very good on the City Turbo. It has a relatively short wheelbase, but also a relatively wide track, which means that it has excellent turning ability on twisty circuits, but at the same time is less inclined to flip over on curbs than many other small hot hatches due to its width. Being wider makes it more grounded. So for curb tracks such as city circuits and tight technical tracks, it's excellent. The fact though that it also has that extreme power for its engine size means that even on tracks which do require more straight line speed, it's still an excellent choice. And overall, if you haven't tried this car before, I would definitely recommend it. But that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.